All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast. Hello, Victoria Taft, your host. How are you? Lots going on today. First of all, the president's not dead. We're going to talk about that because he was dead over the weekend or late last week. That was the left, their talking point last week because Donald Trump had not been seen for a couple of days. Plus, we're going to have an interview with a guy who's written a book about farming and how the country's farmers have fared. So in honor of that, I wore my kale t-shirt with Cookie Monster on it. And it says, "What's kale?" And I happen to love kale and I grow kale. So I'm all good with kale, but it's the closest thing I have to a farming kind of a t-shirt that I have. So there you are. Okay. Well, it was the worst ghoulish lie ever about Donald Trump. It was the worst. And when they're not cheering on the efforts to unalive Donald Trump, you know, those efforts that were undertaken, and one of the people who tried to unalive him is going on trial soon. When they're not cheering those efforts to unalive Donald Trump or taking to the streets to call him a Nazi or a, Pol Pot or something, a dictator, lefties and Democrats and weirdos are wish casting his demise. And the hook was set. I had to go back for the origin story. The hook was set by some supposed former Trump insider who was not a Trump insider at all. And, he said, well, he hasn't been seen since Tuesday during the cabinet meeting, which was 3 hours long. Remember that? The press conference, which was essentially the cabinet meeting. And so that marathon cabinet meeting, and all of a sudden Trump went dark. He went dark. Oh no. And he has a bruise on his hand. Therefore, he must be dying. And indeed, for a while he was unalive, because that's the only way you can say that on YouTube, I understand. You can't say the obvious. You can't say the way in which they got there and anything else about it. So the ghouls had taken over, and oh my goodness, you would have thought that these guys, well, I mean, check it out. I mean, this is getting pretty ridiculous. Yeah, there he goes. There he goes. Down, 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 down. Da, da, da. There he goes. Donald Trump. Yeah. I mean, so many memes, so much going on, trying to fuel the narrative that something had happened to Donald Trump. You know what's really interesting about the fact that the ghouls took over? What's really interesting is that it just points up the truism about Donald Trump. He's everywhere, ubiquitous, all encompassing of the news cycle, and they can't stand it when he's there, and they can't stand it when he's not. Joe Biden missed 577 days of work during his presidency. That is a 40% absentee rate. These are the same people who thought nothing of Joe Biden missing all of those days of work and never really overtly wondering about his health. And now, 2 days of Trump being out of the news cycle or not being actively in it, and he's, there's something really bad that's happened to him. That's how powerful Donald Trump is. Think about it. Now, Donald Trump also has been, as I say, ubiquitous. The idea of him being gone is something that is cheered on by the left over and over again. I mean, if you just doubt me, go look at the tripe that they're peddling over at Democracy Now! I had a field day on their Facebook account today. It was like, I cannot believe all of the misinformation here. This is amazing. I'm going to start putting their misinformation on my Facebook page, the Victoria Taft Show Facebook page and the Adult in the Room Facebook page, because this is re-donka-donkalicious. Well, the funny thing was that even though this was all fueled by the left, right, this is what Donald Trump was really doing. He actually took a couple of days off. And I'm not playing. Look at this is Ty, his granddaughter. Or no, I'm sorry, Kai. He's got a good swing. I'm not a big golfer. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that driver she's got. Holy cow. Look at this little short game. I think she got a hole in one there. She's going to be like a D1 golfer. Unless I think she's still in high school. So this guy goes, "Oh, it's a heck of a swing for a guy who's been not unalive for a while." Trump is a modern day Lazarus. I don't golf much. I've taken a few lessons and I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. Look at the swing. Boom. Okay, so she can do it. She's got the goods, and he's so very proud of her. And so that's what he was doing. He was taking a couple of days off, and it's so unusual that he is out of the news cycle or actively out of the news cycle. They don't know what to do with themselves. I mean, I'm getting a big kick out of this, right? This is just killing me because I tell you, these people, they're just bloodthirsty. They just really are. And I wanted to mention the fact that I want to make sure I get compare and contrast, because you don't really know how great he's doing until you have something against which to compare it. So I give you Carolyn Levitt taking a question. This is a few months ago. And this just gives you the idea that Joe Biden was such a no-show. And they were never asking questions about it.
He said at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I'm going to read his quote, "President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of the party, is capable of deception. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it." Can you comment on those remarks and whether you agree with that assessment?
I do agree with that assessment from Alex Thompson, who I understand won an award for writing a story months and perhaps years after the American people already knew that story to be true. Millions of Americans watched our mentally incompetent president struggle with his day-to-day duties of this office. We watched our country be ran into the ground as a result, and nobody in the media wanted to write about that, talk about it. There were many reporters, I will say, right-leaning reporters who did talk about that, who didn't get awards, didn't get coverage. In fact, they were lambasted for their coverage. And I remember being on President Trump's campaign, talking about Joe Biden's clear mental incompetence and being accused by people in this room of manufacturing deep fake videos, trying to persuade the public into not believing what they saw with their own eyes for many years. And I think it's about time the legacy media finally admits that was one of the greatest cover-ups and scandals that ever took place in American history. And certainly it did contribute to the decline in the trust that Americans have for the legacy media.
Sure did, as well as just a general mistrust of your government. I mean, that's the whole thing. A lot of people were blackpilled by Joe Biden's presidency. What's interesting is that the day that they started the rumors in earnest about Trump being, not with us among the living anymore, there was a reporter from the Daily Caller who was interviewing him for a good hour in the Oval Office. And one of the things she learned, because I read the transcript yesterday of her interview, which thank you, Daily Caller, for putting that out there, was the fact that the president is going to make I think it's a Hall of the Presidents or a, Hall of Fame of the Presidents, whatever. And he's going to have gold frames because it's Trump. And it's going to be outdoors. So I'm not sure how he's going to accomplish this, but if anyone can, I would imagine it's him. And so one of the things they're going to do is select which portraits they're going to put out there, replicas of the portraits. And he asked the Daily Caller reporter how Joe Biden should be depicted. And he'd already picked out a photo that they were going to have made into a portrait. And it was of the auto pen. And that is how Joe Biden will be depicted, because I think the more Trump is in office, the more he realizes what a fraud Joe Biden was in office, what a lazy ass fraud he was and is. And of course, he couldn't help some of it because, after all, because he was unable to do that. I mean, is that just, you just don't know until you have something to compare it against. Really. It's truly amazing. It really is. Well, one of the things I wanted to mention is that something else big happened. It happened on Friday. And I wish I'd written up a story about it, because it's such an important story. And it's a free speech win for the Babylon Bee, as well as a meme maker. As we found out, when the Biden administration had a guy arrested and put on trial for making a meme and calling him someone who is trying to dissuade people from voting, as happens in every election. This one happened to be about Hillary in the 2016 election. So that would have been subsequent to that. Later, during the Biden administration, he was investigated and he was arrested. And then he was put on trial. And it was just recently that he won his case. A meme on Twitter at that time, 1.0. And so, I've been in the business. I've been in the online publication business since 2005. And then I've been in the working for someone else since, I think, 2014, maybe. I've never seen so much censorship as I had during the Biden administration. It all had to do with the election, quote unquote, efficiency, as well as propriety, security, and how they had to federalized it, which we've talked about on this program before. But free speech won out. Free speech won out for the Babylon Bee and for a meme maker. I'm so very happy to report to you that before the last election, Gavin Newsom of California said that a particular video that was clearly an AI video was so beyond the pale, so unbelievably bad. Let's just watch a little of it, shall we?
Hi, Kamala Harris, and your Democrat candidate for president, because Joe Biden finally exposed his senility at the debate. Thanks, Joe. I was selected because I am the ultimate diversity hire. I'm both a woman and a person of color.
So she goes on, and I'm going to play it without the music, because you never know what me might get in trouble for. So it goes on. You can read the chyron at the bottom, the lower third. And so what Gavin Newsom said, hey, this is illegal. You can't do this. This makes Kamala Harris look bad. I'm going to outlaw this. I'm not even kidding. Now, go with a guy, believe a guy whose basic instincts are to shut people up, and then don't elect him for president in 2028. And that was Gavin Newsom's come from on that issue. And so he got an assemblywoman who, by the way, is an idiot who doesn't know squat or diddly about prior restraint. And she penned an assembly bill and they passed it. And so the the folks over at the Babylon Bee picked up the mantle, went along with a meme maker, and Alliance Defending Freedom went to court, and they won on Friday, because free speech eventually wins. Awesome. Kamala did not. If I made obscene gestures with my hands, I would have done one there. But once you start, it's hard. Can't do it. You can't make obscene gestures. That's a bad look. Okay, I won't. I won't. Anyway, the video was funny. The video was funny, and free speech wins out. And so we can be thankful for that, right? I'm grateful for that. There's an update I want to bring to you about the person who shot up the Catholic school. Remember last week we were talking a little bit about it. And so Andy No had written about it. And here's the nutshell of that before we start talking about farming, which is really going to be interesting. And the nutshell is this. We thought because the mom's signature on the yes, he can become a girl paperwork was, we thought it was all her, but it turns out that I think they have 6 kids, the entire clan of kids and her husband, who's from whom she is divorced, piled on and said, I will never speak to you again if you don't sign this paper. The mom, who worked at the Catholic school for a time and was more conservative in her beliefs, I think she went to church and such, she reluctantly signed. And so Andy No wrote a story about that because I think that he just wanted to be fair to the mom and how she was reluctant to do that. But what it really does is it empowers people who are caught in this bind where their child is telling them what they should do, which is always a tell. Don't do that. Wait till they grow a brain and then you can take their advice. Okay. That I highly advise that as a mother of grown children. Don't accept one bit of advice from them that means anything until they are at least past 25 years old or something, or you can trust them. So I just wanted to pass that along. I think that's important. We are fair to her and that she has her voice heard a little bit. And I appreciate that. Okay. Well, you know what's really neat? I've been enjoying some of the discussions that I've seen Brian Reisinger engage in about farming and about his book, which is called Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing Farmer. And, farming is such a huge issue right now. We talk about regenerative farming. We've spoken with a regenerative farmer. And, I guess what regenerative farming is farming. But for some people, it's really intentional. It's not corporate. And it means something. It's a lifestyle. And Brian Reisinger, welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you shedding light on all these issues.
Lots of stuff going on. I really appreciate the fact that you wrote this really meaningful story where it's beyond the trope of blood, sweat, and tears, but in farming, as your family has learned, that is a reality every single day. Tell me about your book, how it came about, and just give us some little background on that, and we'll start launching into some more specific questions.
Absolutely. That sounds great. I appreciate that question so much because so often we talk about these issues and things affecting our farms and our food, and we forget about the people along the way. And that's really where this began. I grew up working with my dad the time I could walk, and I remember being out there in the farmyard with him, hearing a truck come in, gravel popping under the tires, and there was a driver coming up, whether it's a local farmer or a seed salesman, whatever, saying to my dad, "Hey, this farm went under, that farm sold," and we're just living with that. So even as a little kid, yeah, and I knew it was a way of life disappearing and it was special. I didn't know why it was disappearing. And it turns out that most people in this country don't either. But that's what I discovered as I pursued my writing craft, the farm, is it needed to be investigated. So what I did with Land Rich, Cash Poor is we said, let's answer that question. And I dove in telling our family story from the Great Depression on up through today's stories of survival, through farmland accidents and weather that blesses or threatens.
Yeah.
Economic upheaval. And then I investigated what are the hidden areas of history driving this disappearance? Why are our farms disappearing like they have? The economic, political, and technological reasons for the past century. What I found is we've been losing farms at the rate of 45,000 a year for the past century. We've never got why.
Why? Yeah. Could you tell us some of the reasons why?
I can. I love that first image. I just want to say about
that's from your Twitter feed or your X feed.
Culver's, which is a Wisconsin-based restaurant, they have a big campaign where they try to buy food from farmers, local farmers, and they try to support our farmers. We need more of our economy doing that kind of stuff. Here's why our farms are disappearing. There's 3 big categories. One is economic crises that have occurred in this country. We didn't know how they were affecting the farm, whether it was the Great Depression, farm crisis, the 1980s, COVID. Every time something happens and we don't have a handle on, okay, we know we went through the Depression. We know we just had the Great Recession. What happened to our farms? We don't know. The second reason is political decisions, both parties over time, the establishment of the Republican Party as well as the Democrats, different points in history,
Sure.
everybody made these mistakes, right? And then the third, in addition to those government policies making those economic catastrophes worse, is technological. And we've had technology really move farms forward. But also, our technology has left so many family farmers behind. We've lost track of making sure that our machinery and our different equipment is something that farms of all sizes and types can access.
Huh.
Got competitive farms that are perfectly resourceful, perfectly efficient, but they can't adopt the new technology that only works in a great big facility or a huge row
Well,
planter.
whose fault is that? Is that the manufacturers for building them too large? Can they scale them down for a family farm, or are they just prohibitively expensive?
It's such a good question. And the honest answer is it's kind of all of our fault. And what I mean by that is in the second half of the 20th century, we had all this research out there. So it wasn't just manufacturers or it was government, it was universities, it was everybody. And they were saying, hey, farm wages are way lower than manufacturing wages. We got to do something about that. That's a problem because we're losing and we talk about this in the chapter, our family had mass migration, just like everybody else did, from rural areas to urban areas to chase those factory wages. So for a while, we needed technology. Researchers at universities and government and at private companies were right to say, okay, what can we do to farm more acres and have more animals with fewer people breaking their backs to do it? That's why not everyone in this country has to grow their own food. So to a point, that was good. But we
Mhm.
lost track of the fact that went so far that we have all kinds of farms that are medium and small size farms where they're competitive. They can produce the food that we need, but the technology doesn't work on their farm anymore. It's either too big to be adopted or it's too expensive. And so only the
Mm.
biggest operations can do it. So even if we weren't screwing up these economic crises, and even if we didn't have government screwing things up, we'd still have technology that was naturally leaving people behind. What we needed was to have a conversation like this to say to the private sector and government and
Mm.
universities, hey guys, we're losing sight of what our farms need to be able to continue to innovate and compete globally.
It sounds like somebody needs to get into the rental business for farm equipment, this satellite, driven. What I mean is the farmers that I've seen, they have their combines and all their other things that are they're connected. They're connected to satellite, and even your local pumpkin patch that has a corn maze has a satellite connection where they can make the corn maze or something. I mean, so it is a big thing. It's surprising to me that so few people have that capability.
Yeah.
Is that, am I
It's
right?
so
Or
You're absolutely right. And also the new technology that's coming doesn't even cater. So if we need a model of some kind that breaks that barrier that you're talking about, but we also need the new technology coming up to actually cater to farms of different sizes. I'll give you a perfect
Mhm.
example. AI. AI freaks people out in a lot of different ways. I understand there's a big fight and debate over AI and jobs, and
Sure.
I got to have that discussion. As it pertains to farming and AI, which is something that people aren't talking about, but has the same problems tied to it, we could have, you could imagine a world where AI means just one great big NASA style bank of computer screens and just one person running a, million acre farm for one guy.
Sure.
Or you can imagine a world where AI creates all kinds of small modular vehicles where the small farmer can have a small AI operated vehicle to tend to their fields, and the bigger farmer can have more of those modules. So it scales up and scales down. We don't design stuff like that anymore. We just design it as big as we can. And
Sure.
that's the problem for our farms too.
Can I ask you, one of the things that has always puzzled me, or maybe it shouldn't puzzle me because don't think government is pretty much ever the answer. I'm so, but I, I I wonder how the markets and how the farming products or the farming business itself are distorted by government subsidies. And I say that as a warning because I've seen, and I think we've all seen, what government subsidies have done to, for example, the price of college, the price of student loans. Every time the government gets involved, there is a distortion in the market. And I have to believe that is something that has occurred in the farming industry.
Yeah.
Dispel that notion or at least affirm it.
No,
Tell, how is that happening?
you're right, and it gets messy very quick. And
Yeah.
so what I would say is The way I look at it, and there's a lot of people in farm country who agree with you. Even if they have had no choice in their mind but to access one program or another because they're trying to, they're just dealing with their own reality. Whether they've done that or not, a lot of people agree. And I always kind of think about it this way. I think government can't fix the issue, but they can sure contribute to screwing it up. And as we've had for a very long time. So here's what's going on. For a century now, since basically the Great Depression, when the government kind of waged this big, huge intervention in farming, we've had program after program pile up, and we've never really reformed them in a deep way and dealt with that. And so what happens is we got a bunch of programs that aren't working anymore the way they were supposed to, if they ever were. We got a bunch of programs that are contradictory, honestly, because we keep piling them on. And then we got other programs that become prone to favoritism and abuse, which I think is part of what you're talking about too, because that happens to government over time.
I
And
suppose, yeah.
so we've got all these programs, and that's why it's
Human
possible.
nature is what it is, right?
That's right. And government mechanizes that, right? Puts it on overdrive. So now we have taxpayers, hardworking taxpayers, who are correctly asking, where's my money going to? And then you got family farmers who are saying, where's all that support that was supposed to be coming? It's wasted in some cases. In some cases, we've got certain types of companies or corporate structures taking advantage of it. You got non-farmers taking advantage of it, all kinds of things that keep that money from getting to where it's supposed to get. So whether you agree with one program in the first place kind of is irrelevant at this point because they aren't functioning right. We need a moonshot to basically redraw government policy around farming in this country.
When did it start to go wrong?
That's a great question. It probably was in the biggest way was probably in the years after the Depression. Because what happened in the Depression, we had farms getting wiped out at the same time that people were starving. And so it was like this conundrum. We need these farms surviving, and how do we
Yeah.
feed people? So, I'm just going to, for sake of argument, let's set aside the Great Depression, whether they did the right thing or not. There were people that argue we got to do this for emergency purposes, right? Okay. Some people might buy that. Some people might not buy that. Fine. But those emergency actions continued after the Depression. They continued on in through the rest of the 20th century. So whether that program was effective in that crisis or not, it just continues. The government spending continued to go through the roof, and it got bigger and bigger. And the folks that are able to take advantage of that are who? When government's picking winners and losers, it's the people who can tilt the scale in their favor that win.
Absolutely. Big boys always win.
That's right. So you got big folks coming in. They've got the lobbyists to shape the policies in the first place. Then they got the lawyers and the tax accountants to take advantage of it. So government built this thing up, whether everything that was done should have been done during that emergency of the Great Depression or not. We could debate each program, but the big thing is that it continued after that. And it's been something that people have been able to take advantage of to some degree ever since.
Yeah. Do you think fewer subsidies would be a balm for the farming industry? Where, I don't know, farmers would probably disagree with me, but
well, it's such a good question, because it's kind of like having that tiger by the tail. You don't exactly want to be holding on to that tiger's tail, but you're afraid if you let him go, he's going to turn around and bite. That's the situation that farmers are in. They may not want to be involved in these subsidies anymore, but they may have a business model that depends on it because their grandpa or their dad did it that way. And it's like, well, how am I going to do this without that certain amount of revenue from my soybean crop?
Right.
And they want to do new things, and they can get there, but they need help. And so less subsidies is maybe part of the answer long term, but to your right, you'd have farmers saying, some of them saying good riddance, and some of them saying, hey, I agree, but I've got a business built around this through no fault of my own. So what we need to do is diversify the subsidies, first of all. Quit picking winners and losers. It's crazy. You've got some crops that, like sugar, that have a whole bunch of subsidies around them.
Yeah.
And people who grow like fruits and vegetables, like asparagus farmers in Michigan, to the east of where I grew up, they get not even basic crop insurance. Crop insurance is when the farmer pays in and the government pays in a little bit, and if the price goes down below, they get a payout. You can argue whether you like the government part of that or not, but the program, the insurance part, makes sense. And asparagus farmers don't get any of that. In the meantime, sugar's got all kinds. And then look at our food system, right?
Yeah.
So could we make something work with fewer subsidies? We probably could over the long term. In the meantime, we got businesses that are depending on it and others that are being completely treated unfairly. I think if
besides asparagus, what else do you see?
Honestly, most fruits and vegetables, which is incredible.
Why is that? I mean, because we import so many of them, or what have you?
It's partially that, and it also has to do with what we were talking about favoritism and abuse. The industries that have had the money to pay the lobbyists to lean the government policy in a particular direction have been able to do that. And it's built up and it's compounded over time. And eventually you get so many poker chips on one side of the table and nobody's got any over here. So it's just an imbalance that's built up over time.
Sure. It's a distortion.
It is a distortion. So if we can quit picking winners and losers, partially by just kind of like diversifying a little and making sure if there is something that has to be there to help with like uncontrollable weather, let's have all farmers be able to qualify for that. But then let's quit picking winners and losers from there.
It must be an interesting time for you to observe. Your family has a farm. You're not actively farming, although I understand that you get in the, you're on the machinery and you're helping out as much as you can. You're an author and so, but it must be a very interesting time because now we see in the Trump administration, in addition to the tariff situation and sort of busting down the door to Europe for a lot of American products, that must be very exciting for some people. And the other thing is that we're looking at more regenerative farmers and that kind of a thing. So you're looking for smaller, more local sourcing for your food. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you're right. It is a fascinating time. And for those folks who haven't seen the backstory, as you mentioned, I tell our story. And they throw me in a tractor now and then I help on the business side. But my sister's the one that had the talent for cattle and crops that I didn't. So she's working to take it over from my dad. My dad's still farming. My sister's working to take it over. And I help where I can. And part of that is trying to find solutions. So it's an interesting time. It's always a little bit of a scary time for farms because they've been living at the edge for so long. And so I'm really excited of a lot of things that are happening and a lot of them try to take advantage of. I also was raised by people who survived the Depression and the farm crisis. And we're taught to always be afraid because you got to kind of just like always have that drive.
There's nothing wrong with that. Me too. My parents were brought up in those times. My grandmother and grandfather and then had a farm. And then my mom and dad grew out of that. I mean, we ate K rations as children. You know what I'm saying? That's, everything from the Army Navy store, that was just how we lived because we were always living on the edge. And so I'm used to that kind of stuff.
Our families would very much relate, probably feel like we were reading each other's mail. And so but to get to your point of your question on the excitement, if we have a world where we're going out there and we're driving harder bargains with trade partners, we can break out of this situation we've had with ever since the 90s. It's been, hey, you got to have free trade, freewheeling, whether it's fair farmers and American workers or not, or they get ripped up. It doesn't matter. We just need more markets, more markets. On the other hand, you can't totally shut down trade 100% because farmers want to sell more domestically, but some of them have types of crops and products that the excess has to be sold abroad. So farmers are stuck in the middle. But if we have these trade deals where they're driving harder bargains and we're getting trade deals with the UK and Japan and Indonesia, and there's been progress with various parts of the EU, and you hear about all this stuff going, there's been ongoing debates with India. If we can land trade deals after tougher negotiations like we've been having, we can have trade deals that put family farms first. And that's actually what we need. Farmers have been getting screwed by unfair trade standards that pushed prices down for decades. And they also need more markets. And so having tougher trade deals that put family farms first is something that I think we're at a point in our history or whatever people think of politics, we should want to land more trade deals that are tougher negotiated. So that can be a very exciting thing. And the issue of regenerative farming, more people than ever care about where their food comes from. And that's such an exciting thing. We need to make sure that we make that transition in a way that small businesses that have very little money and very little time to waste, very little room for error, can make the changes toward new crops that people want their food coming from. But people caring more than ever where their food comes from, and regenerative ag and other practices is a chance for us to take farms that have been stuck growing certain types of crops and products in broken markets and moving them into new entrepreneurial opportunities. So we got to do it the right way. But if we do, it can be very exciting.
It's you have to be a talented person and an artful person in order to do that, in addition to being a good business person. But, my family, my mom's side of the family grew up in Sweden and on a family farm, which is still in the family. And we were able to go several years ago, but what was a real eye opener was the fact that my cousin was a dairy farmer, a crop farmer. I can't remember what he was growing at the time. He was a forester. What else did he do? Did I say dairy farm? And then he also grew steers. for meat. And so, I mean, he had to do everything.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things I found fascinating was you know, he's up in like Nowheresville, beautiful country, unbelievably beautiful country. Probably looks a lot like Wisconsin actually in Sweden. That's why so many Swedes and Germans and all those guys decided to settle there. But what was interesting was from Stockholm, they'd send him, you know, because it's hard to find people to work the land. He couldn't do it all himself, and his kids were grown, and they were going. They were at that time. Well, actually, when I was there, they were young, but they're really too young to really help much. And they'd send him farmhands who were on a drug rehab program. So he'd get these heroin addicts Stockholm. And he'd have to make men of them. I mean,
Wow.
it's just, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Talk a little bit about what you think of that. And the other thing is, you know, what you've got, I found some pictures on your timeline of your X post, and, you know, you've got some people working in the fields. And how hard is it to find workers now? I mean, obviously this whole immigration crackdown and that sort of thing. But Trump's actually softening on that. He knows farmers need workers. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating to hear that program. And I got to say, I admire your relative for doing that on
Yeah.
top of all the types of farming he's doing. And even if he's only doing one type of farming, I always say every farmer, people like my dad and sister, they're not just farmer, they're also a plumber, electrician, a
Oh, yeah.
carpenter. But
Absolutely.
so rehabilitating people from drug programs is a whole nother level. On the other, if you're going to have someone figure out a way to straighten out their life and get going in the right direction, there's maybe no place better than a farm, you know, where you learn the circle of life and you learn the value of work, and you really have a chance to grow as a person, I think, while you're growing food. But you know, on the labor issue, you're so right. It's a fraught time right now, and farmers are. This is another one where farmers are caught a little bit in some political crosswinds. I'll explain what I mean. Farmers from rural America, a lot of small towns and communities, very big supporters of President Trump. And
Yeah.
for a number of them, one of the reasons they might have done that is because they agreed with securing the border. So whether people like that or not, that's a huge source of
Well,
President
you
Trump.
don't want a pedophile working on your farm, okay? You just want to
Yeah,
make sure you get those bad dudes out, right? So
that's right. Well,
get the good people back in, you
there's
know.
been raids where some of that stuff is found, you know. And farmers are living that world. And then on the other hand, they're also living the world where about half of our farm labor comes from immigrants right now. And so that's a challenging situation because farmers, many of them, I don't want to speak for all, many farmers want to secure the border and would be supportive of the policies, but also would say, hey, we got to figure out a way to have a workforce here that's legal. And some of that comes from immigration. So
Sure.
there's ways to do that. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I always say to people is, look, you know, if we want to secure the border, which for a long time was a bipartisan goal in this country, if we want to secure the border, secure legal workforce, what we need to do is crack down on the cartels that are not only trafficking drugs, but they're trafficking people. And they make it so that it is difficult sometimes for employers to know if someone is here with a legal status or not a legal status.
Mhm.
And also, we got to do that while securing a legal workforce with like farm visa programs and things like that. You can do that.
We've done
But
it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. But we got to get serious about solving the public policy issue, which is the challenge with Washington. There's one other thing that can help that actually, I don't want to say it sidesteps the farm debate, but it's sort of like bigger than
Okay.
the immigration farm debate, which is if we stop having our farms relentlessly pushed toward get big or get out. That's what we've been doing to farms. That's why they've been disappearing. What that means is get big or
Mhm.
get out forces farms to get bigger and bigger and have cheaper and cheaper labor. So if we move away from bigger and bigger farms and cheaper labor toward more of our farms of all sizes able to be growing entrepreneurial ventures again, those can be growing small businesses with rising wages. So let's go from forcing farms to get bigger and have cheaper labor to having more farms able to have a way to make it and have rising wages for all.
How do
That's
you do
something.
that? What are
Well,
the economic pressures that have to occur in order to make that
totally.
sustainable?
One of them is we got to fix the technology issue you and I were talking about before. We got to have American innovation reaching farms of all types and sizes. If you're competitive, if you're resourceful, you can utilize this technology. You don't have to be a certain size. We got to do that. We got to make sure that government makes sure that we have fair markets. What I mean by that is part of that is international trade, what we just talked about,
Yeah.
fair trade deals and make sure it's not imbalanced, but also markets that make sure that, the biggest players in our economy of any industry aren't able to be anti-competitive, monopoly type stuff. We got to make sure that we're not allowing that. And then we have to really capitalize on the fact that more people than ever care about where their food comes from, meaning those people need to buy more food from farmers markets, local farmers down the road,
Yeah.
online marketplaces where they can get access to farmers, grocery stores that'll carry goods from local farmers because many will if they know people will buy it. More consumers, you don't have to buy it. You can't necessarily get every single food from a local farmer, but you can
Sure.
do a lot more of it. And we can all if every consumer takes another step in that direction and farmers have more things that they can grow and have a new entrepreneur opportunity in, that can make a big difference. So we got to kind of do all those things at once. And
Sure.
that's the hard part. That's why we have
We
to
can,
inspire.
we can do that.
Yeah.
It'll take organization and that sort of thing. You brought up cartels, and I'm so glad you did, because it reminded me of something. So the cartels are taking over people's families' farms south of the border in Central America, and the farmers get no choice in the matter. The cartels come in, they say, you can go with us, or you can die, and that's pretty much the choice you have. We'll let you stay, and we'll let you work on your own farm, and then otherwise, that's it. Those are your choices. And my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, the cartels run almost all of the avocado industry. And I feel like here we are back at the blood diamond kind of a situation. Why do I want to buy blood avocados? But I know at the end of that, or the very beginning of that trail of food to people, there's a farmer. And that guy just got blown off his land by these cartel people.
Yeah. I don't know the statistics around the avocado industry specifically. However, the forces you're talking about are very real. The cartels are very real. And there's also other threats that are really bad, like the screwworm that is infecting beef in Mexico and coming north. And then just all these other countries that, there are all kinds of foreign countries, let's say Chinese, Communist Party,
Yes.
China, Communist China.
Trying to do stuff.
Yeah, that don't have the same labor standards, don't have the same wage standards, all these things that make it easier to produce something way cheaper than America because they aren't producing it humanely, for among many other issues.
Well, and plus
So
they're trying to sabotage our crops too.
that's
They're
right.
sending people in with noxious weeds on purpose.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And buying up farmland and cheating on their currency and all kinds of right. And so
Right.
the big solution to this is to have a world where we go from importing anything we possibly can from anywhere to having a strong domestic market that we supply here, our own domestic food supply that
We
is
can do
strong,
it.
that
We can do this.
and then sell our excess abroad. Right now, we've kind of got it backwards. This is something that shocks people. So we've been moving
Yes.
farms at the rate of 45,000 a year for the past century. And at the same time, we are importing more and more food than we ever have. Now, I'm going to use a number that existed near the end of the Biden administration, beginning of Trump administration, because it's the fairest thing I can do to just sort of separate politics.
Mhm.
So, and when we're in that time frame, you can talk about who's at blame for one thing or another. It doesn't really matter. We're at $42.5 billion agricultural trade deficit, meaning we were importing $42.5 billion more in food than we were exporting. So put those things together. We are wiping out our domestic food supply by killing our family farms, while at the same time importing more and more food than ever, depending on foreign countries. It sounds like the plot to like a doomsday movie. You know what I mean? Like an Armageddon type movie. Why would a country do that? That's what we're doing.
Can't you do that?
So we got to flip that around. We got to do things that we've been talking about here to get family farms able to make it by growing food for Americans and then let them sell the excess abroad and trade where we need to around those margins.
Sure.
That's what we need to do. Right now, we get it the other way around. We're wiping out our farms and we're importing the food. Now, maybe that doesn't solve the avocado cartel issue, but it means that we have more types of food grown in America that can be used instead of avocado. And maybe the avocados that we do buy in that changed world can be more humanely grown. But right now, we're just taking whatever comes from the rest of the globe, however it was produced.
I mean, don't you think that, the fact that farmers were able to adapt and succeed through all of these different times where we had different motivations and economic pressures and distortions and all that stuff. It makes people understand and realize and appreciate the fact that people are flexible. But the fact of the matter is, it always redounds to the small guy who's able to do what he can and do the best he can or she can with the land they have. And in order to do that, they have to take really good care of it. And that's why, we see that this whole idea of the regenerative farming coming back. Some people call it just regular farming. I look at it and I say to myself, when I hear about regenerative farming, when we've spoken with a farmer who got basically left California because she couldn't follow the rules because they kept putting new regulations and rules on her, and she goes, I can't make any money doing this. And she was actually making sure that she was growing food for her own series of restaurants. She had restaurants and she was making food for those, and they just go, I'm just not even, I can't do it. I actually moved to Texas like everybody else. But anyway, and I think of my cousin in Sweden running his farm and using the poop from the steers to, make sure he's got good crops and everything. I mean, I need to find, in fact, I have a big garden. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to find somebody who's going to give me the chicken poop from their chickens in the backyard. I don't have those yet, but anyway.
Yeah.
So, but what are your thoughts? I mean, the whole Maha movement, how this is changing the farming industry.
Yeah, you're so right that some of these practices are all being made new again, which is a good thing. And then some of them are totally new ideas. And there are a lot of family farms that like planting cover crops, for instance. So the farm that I grew up on is a farm that's kind of a mix of a traditional farm, grow corn and soybeans and other things. We're also experimenting with new crops all the time. We once just milked cows, and now we sold that dairy herd, but we're raising dairy cows for other farms, and we're raising beef and pasture-raised chickens. So we're kind of in that place where we're going from that traditional farm to trying to transition into new things where it makes sense. And that's the thing that people need to understand. It's not just us, it's most farms across the country. We have nearly 2 million farms left. We've lost 70% of them. We have nearly 2 million farms left. 88% of them are small farms, 96% of them are family farms. And so these are farms that have been growing something that for one reason or another, the market doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or it maybe has them doing some stuff that they wish they didn't have to do, and they need to transition to new crops and products. So the fact that people care about where their food comes from, and regenerative practices and all these things that are new are good because that creates new markets. We just have to make sure that as we're doing that, we don't do like what advocates of big government would do, where they like take and they force a mandate on someone. That's what you're talking about in California, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got to do it in a way that says, okay, these are small businesses that have very little money, and they got to take that extra money they have and they got to invest it in a new crop. Say, I'm going to try a couple acres in this year, see if I can make it on that. And if I can, I'm going to move away from this other stuff. They have very little money, and they got to be able to take those kind of bets and have them pay off. So we need to work with farms like the small businesses that they are to make the transition. And if we do, we can have a whole new generation of farming and food production in this country.
One of the stories you tell is about the real trauma that happens in the personal lives of people who are really up against it. When the government comes in and distorts the markets and really puts pressure on people and they can't make it, and the feelings that arise from that, having personal experience with how the market or how the government ruined a particular market, and one of my family members committed suicide, and how hard this is, and how your back is against the wall, and in front of you is an entire phalanx of government bots telling you what you can and cannot do, and acting as a picker of winners and losers so that you're on the losing side. I saw that happen in the car market, medical field. And this is just the last 15 years, all this stuff's happened. And that's caused a lot of angst, and it's caused a lot of agitation. And talk about your family story.
Thank you for asking about that issue, and I'm so sorry for your
Thank you.
loss. Without knowing the circumstances, I can tell you that I'm sure that members of my family probably related very much with that loved one of yours. In my family's case, a farm is facing all of those economic problems, and you have parents who are trying to continue onward and worried that they're going to go until one day they just can't provide for their kids anymore, or they're going to turn around and sell the farm, which is like selling everything else, because the farm is not just your dad's job when you grow up like I did, but it's your home, it's your community, it's your heritage, right? So you're left with, okay, am I gonna drive my family into the ground financially, or am I gonna sell everything we've got? Not just our house or change jobs, right? But like everything.
Mhm.
So that is a really, really difficult situation for someone to be in. And then you pile that on generation after generation. We tell the personal stories of my family through different generations. And you look back through our family history and it's like, geez, great grandpa escaped pre-war war in Europe to dig a living out of the dirt. Grandpa and grandma survived the depression. Mom and dad got through the farm crisis. Every generation asks themselves, well, they did that. Why can't I make it? And so people don't feel that they have worth if they can't make it. And my dad and I, we experienced this and saw firsthand why farmer suicides are among the highest rate in the country of any occupation. My dad, I reference it, we sold our cows, we sold our milk cows, and we had other types of livestock, and we kept our land, and we were going to cash crop, and we were going to raise dairy cows for other herds, and we were going to sell beef. So we had hope, we had reason to carry on. But my dad was selling our milk cows after 100 years of our family milking cows. So when you do that every day, morning and night, and that's your purpose, and you suddenly sold that purpose, even if there is something else that feels good or you're hopeful about or your kids are hopeful about, you still question your self-worth. And I remember standing on the porch of a cabin that I have out back in the farmhouse with my dad, and I remember thinking, I wonder, this is the day after he sold the cows. I remember thinking, I wonder if he's thinking that because we had people, a farmer right down the road had taken his life. And I wondered that. And I didn't have the courage to ask him. But we knew from that farmer's example, which led to the creation of an organization called the Farmer Angel Network, that we had to just talk. So we talked and we tried to work through it. And I found out in the course of researching the book, talking to my dad, that he had been thinking about taking his life that very day when we were on that cabin porch. And somehow we were standing there right next to each other, but we were a world apart. Excuse me. We were a world apart.
Mm.
And the fact that my dad was thinking about that and I was thinking about that and we didn't know how to say it to each other just made us such big advocates for mental health. And that's why we told that story. I asked my dad, I said, boy, we're being awful honest in this book. We bared it all. I said, do we want to tell that? You know? And my dad said, we got to tell people because I want them to know that they're not alone. And I'm happy to say that my dad's doing good. I'm grateful for that. And the way he got out of it was thinking about his grandkids. I've got a little 1-year-old. At the time, she wasn't born yet, but it was my sister's kids, and he was saying to himself, I got grandkids here. I got to teach them things. And he saw that there's worth to the farm or whatever happens to the farm.
Mhm.
So it's that next generation that pulled him through, and that's really what's carried every farm family through. And we just have to be aware of these issues and talk about them because they can bring tragedy where you would never expect it.
I mean, it should be a clue that you have a farmer angel network. I mean,
Yeah,
that there's a tell. I mean, when
yeah,
you have an organization that caters to people who have suffered those losses, it's amazing. Especially in your case, you've got. I mean, you're in Wisconsin, right? Your people are in Wisconsin. Your farms in Wisconsin, and it's like, I have dairy cows. How do I not? How do I have to sell dairy cows? I
it's such a
mean,
personal
that's
relationship with their
crazy.
particular. But whatever kind of animal it is, whatever kind of farming it is, you're close to the land, you're close to animals that you care about,
Yeah,
an intimate connection. And the other thing about it, and this is why I'm so glad you brought it up. Farm families are taught to keep their head down and get the work done, right?
sure. Yep.
And so, for anybody in any walk of life, mental health is a hard thing to talk about. And I think we have a mental health crisis in this country across the board.
Totally. Absolutely.
In our case, the way that manifests itself is because you're taught to keep your head down and not complain. I'll give you an example. I grew up picking rock by hand. My little girl, by the time she hears about that, she's gonna think that was like Little House on the Prairie. Like my dad must have lived. No, it was the 1990s. But like we didn't have machinery
Wasn't
yet.
that long ago.
Wasn't that long ago. But we're picking rock and you're throwing them in a bucket and then you're throwing the bucket up onto the wagon and you're doing that at age 10. You're kind of taught to keep your head down and not complain. And there's good to that. There's
Yeah.
resilience, there's hard work, there's values, but you don't learn to talk about your feelings in that instance either. And that's why I think so many of our farm families, it's just one example of why farm families have a hard time sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, what a story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you so much for giving your expertise, and my best to you and your family. And I just pray that everything goes very well for you. And the
Thank you.
book, you can get it on Amazon. Let me just make sure. I want to make sure I see the book title, Land Rich, Cash Poor. Sounds familiar. My Family's Hope, an Untold Story of the Disappearing American Farmer. Thank
right.
you so much, Brian Reisinger, for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for shedding light on these issues. People can find the book on Amazon, bookstores nationwide, and the paperback is just out. We're very excited about the new edition, and I appreciate anybody, honestly, who just spreads the word on these issues and gets us talking. So thank you.
There's a whole genre of cowboy, poets and stuff like that. Now you are a farmer poet, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I like that.
Yeah. I think there's something in there. Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Wow. So that was harder than I thought it was going to be. Wow. I mean, I'm like puddling up here, and I'm going to puddle up a little bit more here. One of the things I wanted to say was, one of our friends of the program, and we've had him on a couple of times, and that's Anatoly Kaluzhny, who's in the Ukraine, and in where I'm old enough to call it still the Ukraine. And one of the things that he's been keeping me posted about how angry he is actually at our country for failure to bail them out and do something for the Ukrainians. And he's really upset with Donald Trump. He has been really upset with President Trump because he's just not, he doesn't catch the vision. But Trump keeps thinking that Putin is going to do the right thing, right? And try to come to the table. But Putin wants land, and Putin wants to keep all the land that he has gotten under the Biden regime. And but when just recently, Melania Trump told President Trump, she goes, every time you talk to Putin, or every time there's a peace deal on the table, or there's good effort at trying to come to an end to this bloodshed, this war, he always goes and bombs something in Ukraine. And so Pastor Anatoly sent me this latest from the bombing last week by Putin after, of course, they were going to have all these meetings. Trump says he's hopeful, but Anatoly just wants prayer now.
2025, Kiev, Ukraine. It's just 5 miles from my home. Russian missiles target straight to living sanctuary, and 25 people was killed, and hundreds of people was wounded. Younger child was just 2 years old. Can you imagine? It's touched my heart.
Yeah.
I ask you, just pay attention for that. I'm very appreciative for everyone who has stayed with us in this most difficult time, and I ask you, please pray for Ukraine. Please pray for protection. Please do what you can to do, just help us to against this evil. God, you know everything. We don't have power in us. You are our shield, and you protect us. Stop this terrible war and help us to get out from this death, damage, and pain. If you can pray with me, please pray together. And God will help us because in God we trust. We ask God in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
And there it is. So, Anatoly's been sending me pictures. He's just very upset about he's just been ticked off at Trump. And I've never seen him so angry as I've had. We've known each other. We're not super good friends, but he was a really good friend of my pastor in Orange County. And they've been smuggling Bibles into that country for years and keeping track of everybody and keeping track of this war. This has been a hot war for many, many years. And so just keep him in your prayers to the extent that you do pray. Please pray for those folks in Ukraine. And I've not always been on Zelensky's side. I think the guy's there's some not so great stuff about the Ukrainian corrupt system there and the way in which the United States entered into a coup in 2014 and started this whole cascade of stupidity. But nevertheless, this is what we're left with. And so I don't know that man can really solve it. I don't. So I guess maybe say a prayer for those guys. All right. Well, let me just tell you what's coming up next week from the Joyful and the sublime to the ridiculous and fun. My friend Don Bentley, who's writing the Vince Flynn universe of books, is going to be on next week. And his latest one is Denied Access. He's rolling it out. I got an author's copy, which is pretty exciting. Finally in the club, and advanced readers edition. So this is one you'll want to get. You want to pre-order this one if you haven't already. If you love spy thriller novels, and Vince Flynn's the granddaddy, if you will. Now, if you don't know anything about Don Bentley, I was just telling a friend of mine who turned me on to Ben Coase, who's amazing. And but I was saying, hey man, Don Bentley's just written the latest Vince Flynn, and the latest one is the last part of the origin story of Mitch Rapp. Mitch Rapp is the protagonist for the Vince Flynn universe of books. So good stuff. You're going to love it. You know, what happened to Greta? How come, she just disappeared from the entire canon, Vince Flynn canon? Why is that? Anyway, we'll get some questions answered. Don Bentley is going to be here next week, and we'll talk to him about that. If you have any advanced questions for Don, if you have any questions, ask him about this. Get him into me before the weekend. I'm going to be talking to him on Monday, pre-recording our show. I'm not sure where we're going to put this. We'll either do it Tuesday or Thursday. Obviously, those are the 2 days we live stream. But let me know. Let me know your questions before then so that I can ask the questions. All right. What a great show today. It's been really interesting. That farming has never been so interesting. Am I right? Such touchstones of every aspect of life. Just incredible. And Trump's still alive. So, yay. This is awesome. Well, you know what we say at the end of every Adult in the Room podcast? You have to keep your head up, your heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. And until next time, just keep at it. Thanks so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. We do not take you for granted. We appreciate every single person who tunes in every week to listen and watch this program. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, live streaming on Rumble, and then on every other podcast platform shortly thereafter when we can port it over and get it over there as soon as we can. All the shows can be found at victoriataft.com, where the censorship regime has been banned by me. Follow me on social media at these names: Victoria Taft, the Adult in the Room podcast, and the Victoria Taft Show. Send media inquiries, or any others for that matter, to victoria@victoriataft.com. And here's a big ask. Would you please subscribe, share, like, comment, recommend, and give this program a 5-star rating where you can? We really appreciate it. We do not take that for granted either. Follow my work at, you guessed it, victoriataft.com. PJ Media, I write tons over there. Flamingo Audiobooks, and of course the radio. I don't do this alone. This show is produced and engineered by Overall Media. 1A Cast is responsible for some of the Adult in the Room podcast's imaging. Logo design by Hageman Creative. The Adult in the Room podcast is produced at Flamingo Road Studios. All rights reserved.